Hi everyone, I'm Faciliating. I'm a therapist and a self-growth coach. I am back with my communication in partnerships uh, workshop, and this time is my final installment, the fourth part, about how to communicate with our partners. And I have talked about the kind of things commonly from my experience in therapy and coaching, what kind of topics be good to communicate about in different stages of our life, and talked about ways we can communicate using different toolboxes, as well as how to communicate using the Sage 4 steps. And if you recall, this is a slide I last ended on talking about Sage SAGE and E, as shown on this page, is embodied, to always go back to ourselves at the end of the day, because only by taking good care of ourselves, by bringing the focus back on how we are able to achieve the kind of calming and open way of communication, then can we model that for our partner. Because sometimes building that together takes some time, and one of us has to be the leader sometimes. And hopefully we'll all take turns being the leader in our emotional connection. So today, what I want to focus on is actually the art of fighting. Now, of course, we try to build a healthy communication so that we don't have to fight. But I would say that let's try not to give fight a bad name, because when we mention the word fight, first of all, let me clarify, I'm talking about verbal, just, debates and disagreements, arguments. Certainly we don't condone any physical violence, because there's always a power differential when it comes to that. People who are smaller size, which tend to be women, although not always women, can become much more victimized in that situation. So we never condone that. So I want to clarify, I'm talking about verbal communication where we're disagreeing, there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of charge. Yes, we want to try to avoid that, so that we can communicate calmly, because whenever there's that element of emotional charge, it's much more likely our defense system is up. We're saying things that could be quite aggressive, and we could hurt each other unintentionally, because that's how our defense system works. Our limbic system, our amygdala, want to strike out the best possible way to defend ourselves. However, we are human beings with a powerful brain but an animal body. We get tired, we get hungry, we get stressed out, we forget to take care of ourselves, we forget our I statement, our toolboxes. So we might be in a place where we are arguing with each other, all the clenched teeth and louder voices come out. But there is benefits to fighting, right? Because sometimes there are things that perhaps both sides are consciously or unconsciously avoiding, and we're not really taking the time, particularly when you're both busy, or even on top of it, you might have obligation with childcare. You just really don't have time to talk. And a fight is actually kind of a signal that, like, okay, we're due for some kind of communication. So this is why in this page you see that it shows both you still care, because obviously you're both still connected, or else you wouldn't have anything to fight about. You wouldn't care enough to, raise a fight with someone you don't really know that well. You can just probably avoid them and get over it. But with each other, it's much more important to hash out some of the differences. And if we learn to fight the right way, right, like again, not physical and not in a hurtful way, it strengthens our bond. And that's actually sometimes how we learn about each other. Because again, we forget to do it. We forget our Sage 4 steps. We forget the open communication because we're tired. We're taxed to the max. I have couples who, after coming to coaching for a while, they would start intentionally schedule date night. As we said, some of the important part of open communication is keeping that opportunity open to accessible. So you schedule date night because you're busy, you have children, you don't have time to talk to each other at home. And sometimes they come back and say, what we end up doing during the first couple of day night is just kind of arguing and fighting about all these things we've been storing up and not talking to each other and holding resentment and not letting the other person know. And of course, if they have a fundamentally trusting relationship and generally healthy relationship, then usually what the fight does is just get over some of that tension. And the end of it, even if sometimes it seems like they haven't really resolved the actual issue, they feel much more relaxed and they can actually start talking. So fighting when it's unavoidable can serve as that opener saying, hey, we need each other's attention. So I'm simply saying if it happens, right? Of course, no one is saying we're going to schedule a time to fight. But if it does happen, don't feel terrible that it does because it's part of learning to perhaps communicate more often, part of the reminder. Now, when it does happen, when we get into that sort of like I'm about to lose it. I'm going to say something I'm going to regret. And even my body is feeling very activated. Then one of the things that's very important is to keep on observing the signs that we are going into a fight and flight mode. Right? We're no longer using our calm voice. We're no longer breathing regularly. We're no longer able to use the stage 4 steps we talked about, and definitely not I statement, right? That's the moment we need to take a time out, right? Whether you're in a restaurant or you're in bed or you're at the dinner table, some silence is okay. And no matter how long, sometimes that's the part that is very much needed in order for that discussion to be productive. Again, this takes a lot of practice, right? If you're already in this really heated moment of arguing, you might not be able to stop right away. But the more we practice this timeout and then take the space to then go back to yourself, again, you go back to using sage because you can't do it while you're together, while you're heated. But breaking up, taking some moment out, and then apply that sage to yourself. Then you can come back. Now, we don't know how long that might be. Might be a couple hours, might be 24 hours, might be a few days. Some of us might have grown up with the saying that, don't go to bed angry or don't let a fight linger overnight. I actually disagree. I think it's important for us to go back to our own space, to let our system regulate ourselves before we come back to each other, right? Of course, unless there's one of you who is able to still stay very calm and help regulate the other person, but it's not really fair for one person to be consistently doing that. Really, ultimately, we need to be the ones to observe our own system and say, you know what, I'm not really in the right moment to talk to you, okay? I need to take a breath. I'm going into fight and flight mode. I need to step away. I'm not saying this is not important, but this is just not the right moment, right? So you come up with some kind of phrase that really signal to your partner, you recognize you're going into a fight. It's not going to be productive. And you need to take a break, go do sage, or maybe there's some other steps that resonate with you. Today, just in one of my sessions with a client, we did this visualization where this is a family relationship, but also it's a relationship with a family member, not an intimate partner, but a close family member that tend to go into a very kind of like, oh, I say this, you say this, and it becomes very non-productive. And they keep on getting caught up in that cycle, and they're really trying to visualize what is happening. And we have this immense ability, once we do take notice of our body, to notice the signs that we're going into that non-productive mode, but then to create some kind of voice that reminds us to observe that part of us and say, okay, this is not the right time to go into it because I'm no longer functioning with my human rational brain. I'm solely in my animal instincts. So this is so important to go back to a space where you do not have to go into that mode. Again, in the beginning, it might take a lot longer. Sometimes you might sit through the entire dinner just digesting your own emotions, accepting where you are, and trying to communicate again, but finding you're still triggered and then go back again. Keep on experimenting, going back and forth to avoid getting to that part where you're really stinging each other with your words, right? And over time, as couples practice, recognizing, oh, we're hitting that limit, we're spilling into a fight that we don't want. Not that, not judging the fact that we're fighting itself, because again, it's a sign that we need to communicate, but we can choose to take a moment, observe where we are, and re-engage at a later time. And over time, they begin to be wiser and wiser about spotting that biological reaction and recognizing, oh, when I go into that mode, my chest is tight. When I'm about to go into that mode, my nose started to kind of get stuffy. Or when I'm trying to go into that mode, I'm tapping my fingers or I'm rubbing my palms. Everyone has a different physical reaction, or my shoulders get tightened, and my voice getting a little high pitched. They each recognize their own sign. And not only are they able to then take a step back and not engage right away and wait for the right moment. So you start out with a little fight, but you calm down, you take time out, and you re-engage. So it's kind of a fight activated, healthy communication, but only because you're able to time out and re-engage. And then what I mean by finding something to replace it is then you, in this process of continuously finding a trigger that sends you into a little beginning of the fight and being able to stop it sooner and sooner, saying less and less, sort of very impulsive things, and then going back to your calm state and coming back, then we're able to say, oh, actually, this is your trigger point, right? This is where you get triggered when I don't do this. This is where you get really upset and going into fight mode if I say something like this. And then we find different ways to communicate with each other, right? We find something to replace it. And you say, oh, every time you haven't gone out to maybe relax and take a massage or take some time for yourself every week, it seems like you tend to get to that point, right? You help each other observe our patterns or behavior. Let's schedule a time to go to a massage together. Or, it seems like we haven't made any sharing about our feelings, or we haven't had to talk about stress at work, or haven't had sex for a certain amount of time. Everyone, again, is different. Maybe we need to schedule that. Maybe we really need to anticipate how our stress pot is being filled, and how our recharge is being ignored sometimes. We can routinely refill ourselves with positive energy and release negative energy. So, using these moments is the opportunity. The minute you go into that, and you're like, oh, wait, something is letting us know we got to talk. We got to talk. But is this the right moment to talk? No, let me back off, take some moment, few hours later or a couple of days later, hey, I'm ready to talk about that, right? Always go back to it. I don't avoid it. I have known partners where you drop it and never come back to it, then it just builds up for the next one. And the next fight might be even more explosive and a lot harder to take time out from. So always intentionally go back to it when you are no longer so activated, and then figure out what is causing this conflict, especially if it's a repeated pattern. Then we get some data point. We realize each other's needs, and we help discover what might be preventive measures that can replace this necessity of fighting about it. Right? But there is some research to be done to keep on repeating this process. So when fights happen, when it's inevitable, make it our friend as part of our research. And finally, I want to talk about fighting with, and finally, I want to talk about managing conflict with kids present, right? I think a lot of couples um, have a hard time with particularly arguing and not being in a harmonious environment because they're worried it's going to be really bad for the kids. Absolutely, we don't want children growing up in a very chaotic environment where they're seeing their parents constantly disagree, constantly fighting, and especially definitely not any physical violence, but even just verbal exchange can be very unsettling. But I want to emphasize to everyone, and again, sort of um, reducing this sense of fear about, oh my gosh, I can't mess up. I can never show my anger or have a disagreement with my partner because I'm going to ruin my kids. That's exactly not how it works, because I think our perfectionist tendency come in and say, oh, it's either I go out or be perfect parent or I ruin my kids, right? That's some of our black and white thinking at play here. Everything is on a spectrum, right? We definitely don't want our kids to see us fighting every day, or more than half the week. If that's what's happening, then absolutely, I think we all need some help in facilitating communication because we're really not making it ourselves. But if once in a while our kids see us having some disagreement, some tears shed, some angry emotions shown, I would actually argue it's healthy for kids to see that, right? Definitely, as I say in this page, there's no violence. Violence of physical any kind is not tolerated, right? And certainly not any verbal violence either. Right? We're talking about just disagreement. We do get a little angry. We might shout a little bit. That's understandable, but no violence of any kind. But and we certainly don't want to talk about kids in the third person because if there is something about them, then we can even include them in the discussion, but not making them feel as if they are the cause of this conflict. Um, and definitely, if we are having that tension, we are having that disagreement, don't pretend you're not fighting because kids are very, very smart. They're very sensitive. They are built, especially the younger they are, where their language skills are not fully formed, they're built with sensitivity to detect danger. And if their parents are not getting along, they sense that as danger because they need to make sure their nest is safe. So if we are having some tension, we're not agreeing, I would just acknowledge to our children, even if we're not actively arguing, just say, Daddy and I having some disagreement, and we're still working it out. We're taking a time out. That's why we might not be talking to each other as much, or um, making it, as I say in the do's part, make it a learning opportunity, so that they know this is how adults work out their differences. We are, taking some time out. We're um, thinking it over so we can discuss it and make it very, very, very clear when you talk to your kids afterwards or in the midst of it that it's not their fault, because that's a very common assumption on the kids' part, because it's very developmentally natural for them to believe everything's about them, right? They are narcissistic in this stage of development, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. It's a very self-centered stage where everything is about them because they have no ability, no cognitive ability often until a little bit later as they get closer to teenager, even that they are not as aware that things are not always about them. So then they can mistakenly attribute everything good and bad to themselves. So it's so important we have that talk with them and just make it very clear. This is not about you. Mom and dad have disagreement. You're not at fault. That's all you need. That's all they need to know. They don't necessarily need to become, collaborators, or definitely not some kind of intermediary or where we dump our feelings on them. That's definitely a no-no. We don't make them responsible in any way, but we do want to acknowledge to them, hey, we're going through something, but we're working on it. We'll be okay. That's really important communication with our kids, and no matter how young they are. In fact, very well, long-time child psychologist Virginia Satter or Violet Oaklander, a lot of the sort of forerunners in child psychology and family therapy make it known that even when they're babies lying in their crib, have no clear understanding of the words that are um, coming out of our mouths, it is important after there's some kind of argument or a sense of tension between the couples, if there was shouting and things like that, to it's very important to go to the baby afterwards, hold them, just letting them know, hey, everything's okay. That wasn't about you, just us having some differences and things like that. We're still working it out. And even just that tone, that reassurance, help them then separate your relationship with them versus your relationship with your partner. So I want to emphasize again, it is so important when it does happen. Again, if we find it to be happening more often than we like, and then we have more um, sort of difficult discussions, then there are peaceful and happy times, and there's time that we might consider getting some help. But like every family, if we have a disagreement once in a while, or just a couple of discussions here and there, then make sure our kids understand that this is the kind of things that we go through, that it's normal for people to disagree. And after you've had some tension, finger pointing, like this picture showing, then afterwards it's so important to demonstrate reconciliation, to demonstrate that I thing we talked about, to do it in front of our kids. Not to make them responsible or trying to make them be any go-between, but to let them see it being done between the two of you so that they understand, oh, things can get sour sometimes, but they go back to normal. And this is the very definition of resilience. I've had clients who grew up in families where parents deliberately never fought in front of them. First of all, they always sense something is wrong, but then at the same time, they never develop that tolerance of people having a little bit of a kind of difficult moment with each other. So in their own relationship, it can become catastrophic when they have difficult discussions, disagreements, or a little fight. They can often become overwhelmed and even want to run away from something like that entirely because they simply don't know how to handle something like that, because they haven't experienced this very normal emotional curve of going from a little bit elevated to calming down, a little bit elevated to calming down, right? So again, the spectrum is we don't want it to be a huge amount of argument, but we don't want the kids to live in an unrealistic bubble where nobody ever disagree with each other. And that's definitely not healthy and authentic in itself. Okay. So that's all from me. Marriage is such a complex situation, and certainly not all marriage are meant to work out. But even if that's not necessarily the outcome we can achieve, then through open communication, I have also certainly seen couples to, in the end, agree to disagree and have calm resolutions and being able to make it a learning experience for themselves and for their children as well. So there's plenty more out there as far as resources. I just listed three of the names that have a lot of publications, uh, workbooks in terms of couple communication that demonstrate a lot of the principles, and definitely go into a lot more details for some of the topics I covered here. And sometimes, we are not necessarily going to have a serious philosophical, complicated conversation about our marriage. It might just be, bonding to watch one of those movies about marriage, not one of those happily ever after Hollywood or Disney endings, but a realistic movie about marriage. And a lot of couples find a lot of commonality and be able to find a lot of universality in the tensions and frustrations and differences we all go through, particularly in long-term relationships. And even though in this resource I said marriage is certainly I think applies to relationship of all kinds that are meant to create romance and intimacy. All right. Well, that's all from me. Um, I welcome you to join my WeChat group where I periodically post videos and resources, usually a little bit shorter than this. Um, uh, and of course, welcome you to subscribe to the channel so that I can keep on putting out information that's relevant, and welcome your feedback for things you're interested in personal growth, in our family relationships, and particularly in intergenerational and cross-cultural relationships. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.